After years of fighting and devastation, are Russia and Ukraine close to reaching a peace deal and ending the conflict? Hello, I'm Anand Naidu, and this is The Heat. Monday marked the third anniversary of Russia's special military operation in Ukraine. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy spoke during a summit with world leaders in Kyiv.
This year must become the year of the beginning of real and reliable peace. Putin will not gift us this peace, nor will he give it away in exchange for something. We must achieve peace through strength, wisdom, and unity, through our cooperation with you. Peace cannot simply be declared in 1 hour. It cannot be declared in 1 day, today, tomorrow, or the day after tomorrow. Unfortunately, this is the reality.
Meanwhile, Russian President Vladimir Putin honored soldiers on Russia's Defender of the Fatherland Day.
Participants of the special military operation are true to the glorious precepts of our fathers, grandfathers, and great-grandfathers. Showing courage, you, stand guard over Russia, bravely fight for truth and justice, for peace, the future of our people.
Since the conflict, 10.6 million Ukrainians have been displaced. Independent researchers in Sweden estimate the combined Ukrainian and Russian death toll to be in the hundreds of thousands. Well, to discuss this and more, let's bring in our guests. Joining us from Moscow, Dmitry Babich is a journalist and Russian political analyst. From Brussels, we're joined by Pieter Cleppe. He is the editor-in-chief of BrusselsReport.eu. From Virginia, we're joined by Michael Maloof. He is a former Senior Pentagon strategic analyst, and Pieter Zalmayev is director of the Eurasia Democracy Initiative. Thanks, everyone, for being with us. Pieter Zalmayev, much has happened in the past few weeks, much has changed in the last few weeks. There now is a prospect of peace between Russia and Ukraine. But at the same time, the relationship between the United States and Ukraine has changed, and it's changed pretty radically. It's not as cordial as it once was. And then a few weeks ago, we also heard the incoming Defense Secretary, Pete Hegseth, say that any hope that Ukraine could return to its pre-2014 borders is unrealistic. That was the word he used over there. So what is your sense of where things stand right now as far as Ukraine is concerned?
Well, Ukrainians were under no illusions that Donald Trump had a special affinity of some sort for Vladimir Putin, and then he will be a difficult negotiator who will demand the sacrifices, we hope, from both sides. But it seems like he's been playing a very one-sided game, and we saw that played out to our consternation and dismay at the United Nations, where the U.S. had submitted an alternative resolution refusing to call the aggression for what it is, and then voting against Ukraine's resolution. That was something quite unprecedented. So, you know, from the point of view of any sort of classical negotiation tactics, it seems that Donald Trump does not care about showing all his cards and giving them to Vladimir Putin. You know, what you just referred to, Pete Hegseth's statement, etc. They have shown everything that they're willing to basically tolerate from the Russian side as far as their demands, and they have pretty much acquiesced to all of them. No to NATO membership for Ukraine, no standing army of any significant size. A sign-off on the 20% loss to Russia's territory, etc., while at the same time having not demonstrated any sort of concessions they've been able to get from Vladimir Putin. So he's getting everything he wanted and then some. This has created a significant transatlantic rift, and you saw, Emmanuel Macron trying to quickly scramble and try to control the damage. But once again, to use the words of John Bolton, the former national security advisor for Donald Trump, they have been drinking vodka straight out of the bottle in the Kremlin.
Dmitry Babich, let's look at the view from Moscow. And there appears to be mixed messages coming out of Moscow. On Monday, Kremlin spokesman Dmitry Peskov, he stated that Moscow does not see any grounds to renew dialogue with Europe for now. Yet, On the same day, the Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov said that Russia is ready to negotiate with Ukraine and Europe. And the Russian President Vladimir Putin said that Russia is prepared to negotiate with any countries, and any countries can take part in the Ukraine negotiations. Where does Moscow stand on resolving this?
I don't see a lot of contradiction here, because if we look at what happened during the last 2 weeks, the main event was that the United States, for the first time, I think, since 1991, is talking to Russia seriously. You know, there was a long period when the United States did not talk to Russia at all. That was under Presidents Biden and Obama, and during March of President Trump's first presidency. Then before them, there was also a long hiatus when Russia's concerns were not taken seriously. Now, for the first time, Russia is invited to negotiations by the United States. That's important. On the other hand, Putin does not want to repeat the mistakes of Gorbachev and Yeltsin, who were open-hearted Russian people, generous with what did not belong to them, and who made huge concessions to the United States and to the European Union simply because they wanted a better life for themselves. They disliked their poor childhood in the Soviet Union, which is understandable. But the Soviet Union was just one of incarnations of Russia. No one gave these people the right to cede the territory that was not won by them. So basically, I think Putin and Peskov, they are experienced diplomats. And they're trying to show that, on the one hand, we're not pressed by time. We can negotiate when you are really willing to negotiate. On the other hand, we're not like the other side. We're ready to talk, and we want the carnage, we want the tragedy to end as soon as possible. From the point of view of Global South, just look how it looks from a side. Mr. Trump looks like a stingy person that he is. You know, he wants more money for his country. He wants to save his taxpayers' money. Basically, he wants more money for himself. On the other hand, Europe looks even worse, because it talks about peace so long. It called itself peaceful continent, and now they are the ones who are pushing for more war, for continued carnage, who dismiss the compromise from the beginning, before negotiations even started.
Pieter Cleppe, there is obviously deep concern, even anxiety in European capitals over the relationship with the United States, given, as Peter Zalmayev told us, that vote at the United Nations, the meetings that are taking place between the French President Emmanuel Macron and later this week with the United Kingdom Prime Minister Keir Starmer. How serious are these divisions?
Well, the differences of opinion have always been there between Europe and the US. Actually, in the past, the US was more in favor of NATO membership for Ukraine, and Europe was more skeptical. Now it's the other way around. I personally find the threats of a transatlantic breakup and a breakup of NATO to be exaggerated. I find it unfortunate that the likely new German Chancellor Friedrich Merz has been suggesting that NATO could already by June be weakened as a result of this. You know, at the end of the day, somebody like Donald Trump, I think, is very unlikely to give up what essentially amounts to an American sphere of influence. And the key question is in all of this is whether Russia and Putin will accept European peacekeepers after any ceasefire deal. I think when there's European peacekeepers, as also French President Macron seems to think, the United States will give indirect security guarantees to these peacekeepers, meaning Russia will not dare to attack those. But of course, in the first instance, Russia would have to agree with this, otherwise there will be no ceasefire in the first place. And that's not clear. The Kremlin has just denied that what President Trump has said, that Putin would have no problem with European peacekeepers in Ukraine. So this suggests that Putin may well refuse the deal that Trump is trying to sell him under the nice cop strategy, which means that perhaps the US may move to the bad cop strategy next, which would involve sanctions, more sanctions on Russia, which would involve allowing Ukraine to strike deeper into Russian territory. And all of that, of course, carries a great risk of escalation.
Michael Maloof, there is a great deal of focus on how any kind of peace deal that's achieved between Russia and Ukraine can be made secure in Ukraine. We just, as I said, had the French President Emmanuel Macron here. He held talks with President Trump at the White House. Now, Macron is the first European leader to meet Trump after he took office. And France, as well as the United Kingdom, say that they are prepared to deploy troops in Ukraine to secure a peace. The Guardian newspaper referred to it as a reassurance force. They were not using the term peacekeeping force. What do you make of that?
I think, as was just pointed out, Mr. Putin would not accept so-called peacekeepers from NATO countries. I think you can have people from China. You can have people from the global South who can come in. You need neutral peacekeepers who would come on in. And I think otherwise it becomes a sort of a de facto NATO occupation of Ukraine. And I think Mr. Putin sees that. So it would be sort of a creeping form of NATO access into Ukraine when they couldn't get it before. So I think that this is going to be, but the United States and Russia are looking at Ukraine just as a portion of a much larger strategic, geostrategic conclusion, and not only reestablishing diplomatic relations on a firmer basis, but also to actually enter into economic deals. And that's what we're seeing. Even Mr. Putin has suggested that the U.S. could come in and work with Russia on rare earths, most of which are in the Russian-occupied area of Ukraine today. So I think it's almost a fait accompli in terms of what a peace deal will look like at the end, notwithstanding all of the what the Ukrainians and the Europeans are saying, that there will be no giving up of territory, and Ukraine will not enter NATO. Those are already non-starters, and I think the U.S. has already agreed to that. The Europeans don't have the ability to counter any of that. Now they are rushing, and the news just came out that they're rushing to get some $300 billion of frozen Russian assets to Ukraine, given the relationship that the United States has with Ukraine, or with Europe. And so I think that there's Europe is still operating at odds with the direction that the thrust of all of this is going in terms of a settlement in Ukraine. And I think the Europeans are just going to have to go along at this point. They have no other choice. They don't have any alternative. Yeah. War will not be an alternative.
Pieter Zalmayev, what do you make of Michael Maloof's earlier point that the deployment of European troops, whether they be UK forces or French forces in Ukraine, would not be acceptable to Russia because Russia would see that as hostile forces in a neighboring country?
I would just refer to Vladimir Putin's own words. I mean, he said time and again that would be unacceptable. That would be tantamount to essentially NATO's presence. Even though we're talking about individual countries, they're still going to be members of NATO. And so that's how it's going to be characterized by Vladimir Putin. And yes, and that could be a bone of contention between the Washington and Moscow, because Trump understands that that would be, even considering his very suspiciously pro-Moscow stance, that would be a step too far to insist on no such presence in the eventuality of a ceasefire or a permanent sort of peace agreement. Having said that, there's another, conspicuous issue that has been conspicuously as absent in these discussions, and Emmanuel Macron tried to insert it when Donald Trump continues to talk about and bandy about this inflated figure of $350 billion that Ukraine ostensibly owes to the U.S. Macron did mention that there's, also Russian money to consider. We're talking about $300 billion that's been frozen in Western financial institutions. And why are we talking about having the victim pay both with territory to the aggressor and with money to the benefactor, to the patron, to the former ally, I guess we can say it, former now, the United States, where we have $300 billion that's still sitting there that should by all rights go towards Ukraine's reconstruction.
Dmitry Babich, on this question of the deployment of European troops in Ukraine to secure any kind of peace deal, there also appears to be no clear message out of Moscow on that. There appears to be a lot of confusion. I mean, President Trump said that he had talked with President Putin, and President Putin had said, look, he's got no problem with the deployment of those troops in Ukraine to secure a peace. Then we had heard from the Kremlin later, no, that is completely unacceptable.
Well, I think Trump, as usual, presented something that he wished to be as something that actually exists. It's not the first time that he is doing it, that is his manner of action as a businessman, but businessmen should act in a slightly different way than politicians. However, I think the situation with the peacekeepers is pretty simple. Real peacekeepers should be sent by the United Nations Security Council. The so-called peacekeepers from Britain and from France are not going to get the permission from the Security Council of the UN to do it, because Russia and China will veto it, or maybe only Russia will veto it, but they will not have a UN mandate. Without a UN mandate, they're not peacekeepers. They're just foreign troops which will face the eventuality of a Russian strike. I'm pretty sure the British and the French leaders will not send their troops to Ukraine without aerial support from the United States. And Trump will not give that support. We have the experience of their previous invasions, in the strike against Yugoslavia, the aggression against Libya. Europeans always acted together with Americans, with the aerial support of Americans. They are not going to risk even more against a nuclear power. So I suggest we forget about this idea of Mr. Macron and Mr. Starmer. It's not going to be realized in any way. As for the morals and the money, if the United States and the EU had left Ukraine alone, if they hadn't helped the coup in 2014, Ukraine would be in the borders of 1991, cooperating with Russia. It would be a lot more democratic than it is now. There would be no problem of elections. Mr. Yanukovych would be replaced by another president, or he would win the election. They started this disorder. The war started in 2014 because the legally elected president was violently ousted from power, mostly with the help from the EU, not even from the United States. So Mr. Trump wants himself out of this, and I think he has the right to do so, because he is right when he claims it was not me who started the Maidan. It was not me who provoked Russia into military action in 2022. These were Obama and Biden. Let them pay it now. That's the message from him.
Okay, Pieter Cleppe, I guess the challenge for European leaders right now is to come up. They're clearly not happy with what President Trump is proposing, but they need to come up with alternatives, with other suggestions on how they move forward towards a peace. And, the way some European leaders look at this, as it stands right now, is that this would be a surrender to Russia if this continues. So what are European options right now?
Well, Europe has made itself reliant on the United States over the last 3 or 4 decades, unfortunately. So logically, I don't think it is able to act independently. The European governments are not able to, even if they wanted to, which is why talk of breaking with the US is so irresponsible. I mean, you don't buy, you don't get rid of your old shoes when you have not bought any new ones yet. Now, what's the alternative? I think just in general, not just for Europe, but for Russia, the US, and Ukraine, there's not so many scenarios conceivable to end this war. It's very unrealistic that Ukraine manages to conquer a lot of the territory that Russia has conquered back. That's first. Secondly, it's, I think, very unrealistic for Ukraine to become a NATO member, because that would entail mutual defense, and Ukraine as a country, I think, is not sufficiently trusted in the West for that. However, I do think Ukraine could ultimately end up with some kind of a status of Israel, but in the light form, whereby the West, the European governments, but certainly also the United States indirectly, would continue to provide defense support for the part of Ukraine that remains outside of the the Russian aggression. Mm-hmm. With the peacekeepers, I'm not sure. That's a tricky one. To what extent it's even conceivable for Europe and the US to accept peacekeepers from certain countries, but perhaps some neutral countries could be found. Indirectly, you would see maybe then military instructors from the West in Ukraine, so that would not actually be troops. So maybe some compromise between Russia and the West is possible there. But I do think, ultimately at the end of the day, the new Ukraine is likely to end up in the Western sphere of influence. I mean, the idea of having a generally neutral Ukraine, Switzerland style, because of Putin's aggression, I think that's completely off the table now.
Okay. Michael Maloof, I'm going to get back to something that Pieter Zalmayev talked about earlier on, and that was that vote that took place at the United Nations. We had the United States voting with Russia, North Korea, and Belarus during the Security Council meeting in refusing to blame Vladimir Putin or Russia for invading Ukraine. Other major United States allies in Europe actually abstained from this vote. Diplomatically, how significant is this?
I think it represents a turning point. What you're seeing here is that even Vladimir Putin has conceded. Look, he wants Ukraine to continue to exist as a nation state. He has so stated that. I think what Trump is doing by increasing the effort to improve diplomatic relations with Russia, to enter into deals and joint efforts like in the Arctic as proposed. I think he is basically taken a backdoor approach toward negating the importance of NATO as an entity as such as it is right now, as it's presently constituted of 32 countries. I think they will break up ultimately into regional defense alliances over time. But he's basically showing that the need for NATO will diminish greatly by improved U.S. strategic relationships with Russia. And I would point out that the history of Russia and the United States is a long one of favorable exchanges with each other. Look, it was the Russians who were against the British in blockading against the U.S. colonies, and outwardly the Russians were for the Union during the U.S. Civil War. So they feel that they have a stake in the preservation of the United States as an ally, and that's a long history of it. The fact too that they had sold Alaska to the United States. Right. So I think that this is something that needs to be reignited in terms of pointing out these distinctions and similarities, and also the fact that we have to get on with Russia as a strategic partner, and the allies are fine, but they can't be continuing to wage war. The fact that they want to approve another $200 to $300 billion of Russian frozen assets to continue that war is a non-starter. And that is their current position, and they're going to fail.
Yeah, Pieter Cleppe, what are your thoughts on what Michael just said about the future of NATO, that this could be the beginning of the end of this solid 32-nation alliance, that it could actually become regional defense alliances?
That's a tricky one. Personally, I'm a skeptic that Trump generally is about to blow up NATO. I think Trump follows the logic of American self-interest, and he has no qualms to see the importance of spheres of influence. So in that regard, you would think NATO would be something that Trump supports, as long as all the members are actually making their fair contribution, which actually, thanks to Trump, are making a lot more than before. So I could be that wrong on this, that in a year or so that the tensions have become so big. But in any case, at the moment, for the European governments, their defense capacity, is not sufficient to go it alone. So it's a bit of a no-brainer that they will, for the foreseeable future, if they actually want defense, will need to rely on the United States. And I don't think Trump will pull the plug out of NATO as long as the European governments play along with his plans. And as I've explained, European governments have not really any other option. Maybe a word about the 200 or 300 billion in Russian assets that are frozen. This is greatly exaggerated, that this could serve as a fund to help Ukraine. Yeah, you can make the case that Russia has to pay for Ukraine and for all the damage, of course. But there's just been an investigation in Belgium, where lots of these assets are legally frozen with Euroclear. There's been an investigation that a lot of the assets are actually owned by Western banks, are owned by Russian individuals that have no ties with the Kremlin. So it's going to be very tricky to just take these assets. Also because the European Central Bank has warned that this could unleash a financial crisis.
Pieter, Zalmayev, you get the last word, and I'm wondering, where does all of this leave the President Zelenskyy politically? I mean, over the weekend he said, look, he's prepared to resign for peace.
Well, he's achieved a rallying around the flag, rallying around himself effect with this rhetoric from Trump. And then Putin moved in and he started talking about how unpopular Zelenskyy is, and that the former General Zaluzhny, who was Ukraine's current ambassador to the UK, is a much more popular politician. That is kind of a bear hug, we call it in Ukrainian, very dubious praise, which has actually put Zelensky's popularity rating in the mid-60s. So he's doing actually pretty well. But the very fact that they want him ousted once again has helped him. And they want him ousted because they know that in the eventuality of Ukraine having to hold new elections during wartime, that will create increased chaos and weaken Ukraine's military effort.
Okay, and that is where we have to leave it. Thank you to all of you for being with us. That is it for this edition of The Heat. I'm Anand Naidu in Washington.